No, I'm gonna do this. I'm actually gonna do this. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Manya, and welcome to my channel, which is gonna be a professional yap channel. So, my first video is gonna be all the books I've read in 2024. And I know it's already 2025. It's like, well, as of today that I'm recording this video is January 5th. And by the time I upload this video, it's probably gonna be like the end of January. But I've decided to review all of the books that I've read, and I'm gonna be going in chronological order, so the order that I actually read them. I have my book review journal here. So, starting with the first book is called Float. Okay, hopefully this one's just not gonna fall this time. Anyway, starting with the first book I read in January of 2024, it was Float by Kate Marchant. And it's kind of like a teen romance book, and it took me 2 days to finish this book, also because I was on a trip, so I tend to read more. And it's basically this girl is caught in the middle of her parents' divorce, and she gets sent to her aunt's place for Florida for the summer, where she encounters Blake Hamilton, her super hot neighbor, and then that changes her summer. So right off the bat, it's a very cliched book. I rated this 4 out of 5. Only because I like this book, even though it was kind of underdeveloped. But I think from the beginning, even before I read this book, by just reading the synopsis, I knew it was going to be like a very Wattpad-y book. I didn't have much high expectations. I liked it. Moving on, I read Wayward by Emilia Hart, and I gave this book a 5 out of 5. Like a 4.8 out of 5. I really like this book. Like, really, really, really like this book. I don't think I'm gonna go much into the details, because if you guys want to read this book, then I don't want to spoil it. But, like, you know how, like, some books, from the first page you read, you just want to read it over and over again? Because, I mean, you want to read to the next page over and over again, like that feeling. Because this was a good page turner for me. I couldn't stop reading it. And it's one of those books that are set into 3 like different time zones. It's like following a family, like women in 3 different generations of the same family. So the second book I read was The Flat Share, it by Beth O'Leary. I'm sorry. And I give this book a 4 out of 5 stars at the moment. After I read it. But honestly, now a year later, with like, now that it has like sat into me, the story, I will change it to 3 out of 5. This book was kind of slow and dry in the beginning, and then the story began to kind of pick up its pace when our 2 love characters, by the way, this is like a love story, the 2 characters like first met. But honestly, like, the build-up between the 2 characters was very organic, very natural, very realistic. But it's just like the connection between the 2 was unrealistic. They never had anything similar to them. They didn't have the same interests, they didn't have the same personalities. Their personalities were so different that I don't think realistically anyone would, like, with such different personalities in real life, would ever date each other. Next, this book is called The Kingdom of Sweets by Erica Johansson. And this was classified, the genre was like adult fiction / horror. And oh my gosh, this was my first bad read of the year. I give it 2 out of 5 stars, and I feel like even that's like generous. And the entire summary of this book, like, if you read the synopsis, everything's like light versus dark, bad versus good. This book was very underwhelming and very hard to understand. Like, I'm getting flashbacks, but like the way this was written was horrible. It was like all over the place. And I don't know, like, the description in the book, it's a very descriptive writing, and it's very detailed and very vivid. Like, the bloody parts are very descriptive, but the paragraphs were just so long, and it took me a lot. Like I feel like I was using too much brain power in trying to understand what was actually going on. I feel like when you read a book, and like of course you use brain power to read, but like it should come to you naturally. But this book, I feel like it was requiring way too much brain power for me to read. The only reason I gave this 2 out of 5 was because the synopsis and the initial build-up was so good that I genuinely looked forward to read the book. And because the beginning was so good, every time I was reading the book, I was like, oh, it's gonna go better now, it's gonna get better now, it's gonna get better now. Never did. Next thing I read was Destroy the Day. So by Bridget Cameron. Um, this was one of my favorite books of the year. So Destroy the Day is a it's a trilogy, and the first book is called Defy the Night, the second book is called Defend the Dawn, and the third book is called Destroy the Day. I really really love this series, and I actually read the first two books in like 2023, and so I knew this book was gonna come out. Defy the Night, Destroy the Day, the third book came out last year in January, and I knew this was gonna come out, so I was really looking forward to this book. And just to like recap, as soon as this book came out, I like kind of reread the first two books, and then I read Destroy the Day. The entire thing I loved is sometimes with fantasy books, you can kind of predict where things are going. You know, you can kind of sense what's gonna happen. You can guess what's gonna happen. But you know, with this author, I've read her other series as well. But with this author, I can always never guess what's gonna happen. Like I make predictions, I make guesses, and they're always wrong. And I enjoy that. I genuinely enjoy that because the plot twist she brings, the revelations or how she progresses with her book, it's super good. It makes sense. It's logical, and it's nice. I mean, I personally couldn't predict any of it, so I really enjoyed that because I thought I was reading something fresh and something new. Next, I read was Bridgerton, The Duke and I read the first 4 books in the series. So, I am a huge fan of the Bridgerton series, and I basically wanted to read the Bridgerton books for a while now, and I thought that season 3 is coming out, like Penelope and um, Colin's story, which, by the way, the show season 3 is a whole new story itself. And I swear to God, this was like one of the first times I read a book, and I was like, how did anyone read this book and think it was gonna be a good TV show? Like, I always thought in order to be a TV show, or like for a book to be turned into a TV show or a movie, the book has to be good. But this was not good. I'm not gonna review every single book because that'll take too much time, but I will review the first book, which is The Duke and that's Daphne and Simon's story. And I don't even know why I read 4 books. Oh, does I know why? Because I bought all 4 of them at once because I thought I would like them. The book is super, super boring. Like, really boring. So the author, Julia Quinn, right, is very unoriginal. Literally, almost all of the 4 books, it is literally the same plot line. One thing that really irritates me was like how pretty much all of the girls in every single book has 0 personalities. None. And even the guys, they're all like very like macho mans. And the girls are all like, ooh. And I know like this is a period story. So like of course the girls are gonna be more delicate, the boys are gonna be more masculine. But like seriously, like there aren't anything else you can think about. Maybe if my channel blows up, I'll do a more in-depth review of Bridgerton, but let's wait for my channel to blow up first. The next book I also read was not very exciting. It was called One Day by David Nicholas, and I give it a 3.5 out of 5 stars, but I think I would like to revise that to a 3 out of 5 stars. So again, the reason I read this book was because I really enjoyed the movie, the one which Anne Hathaway's in. I think it was released in like 2011 or something. And then last year, Netflix released a TV show One Day. And I really loved the movie. I did not like the TV show as much. I just thought the character of Emma was very bleak in the TV show. I didn't know like Emma in the TV show at all. And I absolutely loved Emma in the movie. So I thought it was very interesting. So I wanted to read the book because I wanted to know how the books were originally written. And if you guys aren't aware, One Day is basically it's a story about Emma and Dexter who kind of met at their university's graduation and became best friends, which is again kind of weird because how do you become best friends? But anyways, um each chapter is basically so they meet on 15 July 1988, and each chapter is basically 1 year on the same day and what Emma and Dexter are 1 year later. So like 15 July 1989, 15 July 1990, 15 July 1991, 15 July 2000, 15 July 2005, and it goes on and on until the story ends. And the book itself, when I read the book, I was like, I'm not sure why Emma and Dexter, our two main protagonists, ended up together. It just, when I read the book, it didn't make sense to me. When I watched the movie, it made sense. When I read the book, it did not make sense to me. And yeah, they do have a deep understanding between each other. They're very good friends. They're very close to one another, and they're there for each other in hard times. But I feel like they annoy each other so much. I don't know if that's British humor or that's just normal British writing. And I also feel like they're insecure of each other, especially Emma. I feel like she's very insecure of the fact that Dexter's super rich and she's not. So at the end, I was like, when I read the book and I finished it, I was like, oh, I'm not sure why they got together because they're so opposite of each other. It just didn't make sense to me. And like I know like opposite attracts, but like this was not attracting. But I feel like the movie does a better job at showing the chemistry between the two than the book did. But I would say one thing that I definitely like about this book a lot is how like it just moves through time. Like that was definitely a beautiful journey. And I will say like reading the book after watching the movie and the TV show in the mind and playing like the movie's like theme song, like the music in my brain made the book experience better. So I feel like if you want to read this book, maybe watch the movie first so you can get a bit of a better context and then read the book. That makes the experience better. The next book I read was called The Kiss of Deception. It's a trilogy. I've already read this book in the past before. I was just rereading it for fun. It's by Mary E. Pearson, and I personally really enjoyed this book. But like reading what I wrote down for my book journal review is I said this is my second time reading the book and it definitely is not as good as I remembered it to be, and it was pretty dragging. I wish the author expanded more on the story of the first daughters and why they are so important to the kingdom. Again, I feel like this is just it's a good book, but again, with every fantasy book, I feel like the author sometimes, whenever they introduce a romantic lead or a love story, they just end up focusing so much on the love story, they sometimes forget the initial setup of the book. And I feel like as a reader, especially as someone who really enjoys fantasy, you want to know the initial mysteries, the initial setup, like what is this world about? What is so interesting about this world? So I wish the author kind of expanded on that more. The next book I read was The People on Platform 5. And this book is written by Claire Pooley. And I give this book a 5 out of 5 reads. I think the reason I enjoyed this book, there are two reasons. One is because I read a couple of bad books right before this. And second is because I genuinely had no expectations for it. And it's like a very normal book about life, about people, about our day to day lives. And I feel like a lot of people will really relate to this book. It's a very heartwarming book, I would say. And for a first time read, it was very realistic, very heartwarming, and it had a couple of uplifting moments. It kind of shows you how life can be very up and down every now and then, but kind of shows it also shows that how having a community, having some friends, even the ones you're not close to, just like knowing people, being nice to people can really just uplift you and help you in hard times. So this was definitely one of my favorite books of the year because it wasn't very messy, didn't have very like shocking plot twists that blow your mind. It was very very simple, very natural, very nice. The next book I read was The Color Purple by Alice Walker, and I really really enjoyed this book. I give it a 4 out of 5 stars, by the way. And this book, so basically, this book was set in the early 1900s, and this book was published in 1982, 83. And this was, I think it's also a movie it was a 2023 movie. It's a good, I haven't watched the movie, but it's a good book. And one of the reasons why I loved this book so much was because of the way it was written. I really enjoy it when authors kind of step away from the traditional way of writing and like write in a very unique way. And basically, our protagonist is called Celie, and this entire book, by the way, it's all about African American people, their culture, their struggles, their story, their life in the early 1900s, set in America, South America, um, the south of the United States. I forgot which state, but and basically our main character Celie, the entire story is pretty much written in the point of view of Celie writing letters to God. So every chapter is Dear God, and then what happened. So it's basically like Dear Diary, but it's Dear God, like writing to God. And I thought that was really interesting. And the reason why I love this book was because it really gives you an inside touch of like belief and faith from during that time. I'm not Christian, but this story I think is Christian. I'm assuming so, but it's just so interesting to always read about how religion is such a huge like vessel of support for so many people around the world, especially people who are uneducated, who are like going through their darkest days, who are really struggling. And sometimes what keeps them going on forward is God. And I feel like I really saw this with our protagonist Celie in this book. This book does get a little boring when they kind of switch to Celie's sister. Her part of the story is not as interesting, but Celie was nice. The only reason this book doesn't have a 5 star is because I don't like how the book ended. It just ended very abruptly. And I wish we had like 2 or 3 more chapters so we could get a better ending and just see how the entire family like settled down at the end. And I feel like the book was so good that I really wanted a good ending, and I just didn't get the satisfaction in the end, so that's why I gave it a 4 stars. But I really recommend reading this book. It's one of those books that definitely make you wonder a lot about the struggles and the lives of people during those times, and especially like the lives of like African Americans after like slavery was abolished, but like segregation was still going on. Just makes you think about like so many things they struggled with. And it just makes you think about how unfair it was on them. And how unfair like it still is right now, but I definitely recommend this book. Really enjoyed this book. The next book I read is called Mythos by Stephen Fry. I really love Greek mythology and I love reading about it. And I thought this book was going to be a fictional book about Greek mythology, but it's really just a non-fiction account of Greek mythology, and it's basically like a retelling of Greek mythology in the chronological order of events that had occurred. So pretty much going like back to where the universe was initially created, then how we got the earth and the sky, and then how we got the sun and the moon, and then how like the entire story with Gaia, and then how like Zeus was born and his siblings and all that stuff, and like how the first humans were created. So I still really enjoyed this book because, again, I like Greek mythology. So to me, I was just pretty much reading information in Greek mythology. So I really like this book. In a way, it is very catchy and interesting because it's like a retelling. I mean, it's a non-fictional account of Greek mythology, but it's kind of written in a way that it's a story. It's like short stories. Like each chapter is a short story. So definitely very I enjoyed it. Like I definitely wanted to read more. The author has also written a second book. I haven't read that yet, but I'm definitely looking I'm interested into reading that. I give this book a 5 out of 5, mainly because, well, I didn't know it was a non-fictional book, but I would recommend you to read this if you want to know more about Greek mythology, but if you're not interested, then maybe this book isn't for you. It's now a day later, and for some reason I decided that filming the second part of this video on a Monday night right after work is gonna be a good idea, but I'm gonna do it. Then the next book I read is called The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence. And I did not give this book a rating because I did not finish this book. This is the second book out of the 3 books that I did not finish last year. And honestly, this book wasn't even that bad. It was just too long for me. It just went on and on and on about the same thing. And it's kind of sad because I feel like the beginning of the book was so interesting, so I got really hooked on. And then in the middle, it was repeating the same plot over and over again, quite literally the same thing. I think I just lost interest, so I just ended up not finishing this book. I do know like a lot of people really like this book, but personally it just wasn't for me. The next book that I read was Percy Jackson. The reason I read Percy Jackson, I know it's a middle school book, but the reason I read it again was because after Mythos, I just got into Greek mythology again, like really intensely. So I wanted to read Percy Jackson. Also, because I wanted to see how accurate Percy Jackson was with its Greek mythology. It was really accurate, but yeah, like I have nothing else to say except for like Percy Jackson is definitely for a middle school read, not for adults. Anyways, after that, I read this book called This Summer Will Be Different by Carly Fortune. And this book is based in Canada, I believe. Yeah, it is based in Canada. And I really, really like this book. It was a really nice, like, summer romance read. And I will say though, to get the best out of this book, you should definitely read it in the summer, like not outside of summer. But like I like this book. I liked how it was kind of different from your typical cliche romances. I like the sexual tension and the chemistry between the 2 main protagonists. I liked how the protagonists were not in university or not in high school. They were like full-fledged adults, and that just made the love story a bit more like realistic and believable, in my opinion. And it's not a whirlwind romance. It like kind of builds on like a couple of years. It's also a bit of like forbidden love in a way. It's like our main girl, she falls in, well, she doesn't fall in love instantly, but she's attracted to her best friend's younger brother. I just thought the characters were really nicely built, like built, well written, and I liked how the love story progressed as the book went on. Definitely recommend. The next book that I read was The Summer I Turned Pretty by Jenny Han. So if you guys don't know, The Summer I Turned Pretty is a very popular, I don't know if it's very popular, but it's quite decently popular, like TV show on Amazon Prime. And for a teen romance, this book was really good. Like, it definitely is meant for teenagers, though. I feel like I should have probably read this book when I was like 14 or 15 years old. I would have fallen in love with this book at that age, but I still liked how it was at 21. But I just really liked how unpredictable this was. And by the way, prior to reading the books, I hadn't even watched TV shows. I wanted to read the books before I watched TV shows. And I just remember like last year in the summer, I was just so desperate for a summer book. Like I just wanted to read a summer book. Like, you know how some books just have those summer vibes. So that's why I chose this. And I thought the entire book, because I had watched like clips from the TV show and I watched like the trailers of the TV shows before, so I thought the book was gonna be about like the 2 brothers, like Conrad and Jeremiah, just fighting over Belly. but it wasn't. And I liked how like the author constantly goes back to Belly's like childhood memories, and it just it did a good job of showing why Belly's so emotionally attached to their beach house. But then the second book, I was like kind of like, it wasn't as good. It just the book felt so much shorter as compared to the first book. And then I also felt like Belly has clear like tension with her mom, and they have like unresolved issues, like very obvious issues. And I wish that the author like went a bit more deeper into that because I was really interested in that like plot line, subplot line. And I feel like a lot of like Belly and her mom's issues also like projected onto her like relationship with the brothers. So I really wish that was more developed. Also, nothing in this book was very significant. Like nothing very big happened in this book. And then the third book was also kind of like meh for me. And like I did enjoy it, the third book, but like again with the second book, I just wish the relationship with Belly and her mom went like it did not go untouched. And the one thing I really hated with the third book was that the first two books, Jeremiah, was shown as this really nice and sweet and kind boy. Like the kind of guy that you're obviously gonna pick. The kind of guy that any girl would fall in love with. And then by the third book, he was so selfish, he was so childish, he was such an idiot. Like the 180 characters switch on Jeremiah was not fair. Like it was not okay. I justice for Jeremiah. That's all I'm gonna say. The next book I read is called The Devotion of Suspect X. It's by Keigo Higashino. He's a Japanese author. This is my first book of him, first book that I've read from him. And it's a suspense thriller book. Japanese authors, I need to say this, Japanese authors do a really good job of writing suspense and thriller books. But for this book in particular, like it was a very good book, but I just wish this book was a bit more suspenseful. Like I didn't feel like that suspense or that thrill when I was reading it, and it was also very short. I feel like it could have been longer. Like the ending was slightly disappointing to me, and I mean I wasn't disappointed. Like I was surprised, but like I was like, oh okay, like I wasn't too shocked over it. So I wish there was a bit more of a suspense element in there. Then the next book I read, so I got this book from Book Talk, and I actually enjoyed it. It's called Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. And if any of you guys are in Book Talk, I'm pretty sure you've seen this in like those Book Talk recommendations. And the premise of this book was basically a girl. Our girl's name is Evangeline Fox, and basically Evangeline Fox, lover marries her stepsister, and heartbroken, she goes to the temple of the Prince of Hearts, like the card Prince of Hearts. Yes, and his name is Jax, and she asks for a favor, and in result, she makes a bargain with the Prince of Hearts, and in return for her favor, she owes him 3 kisses, which he can reclaim anytime, anywhere, for whatever reason he wants. The only problem is the Prince of Hearts is like cursed to never love. And I mean, he can love, but he's cursed to never have a girl fall in love with him. And anyone he kisses will die. And only his one true love can kiss him. And he's been alive for decades and he's yet to find his one true love. And the synopsis was very interesting. Like making a bargain for 3 kisses with the Prince of Hearts. So I got into this book very easily. I really liked it. And right off the bat, like everyone knew Evangeline and Jax were gonna get together at the end of the trilogy. I really enjoyed this book. Like the kisses definitely came in scenarios I did not particularly expect them to. I definitely saw the bigger picture of what, because it's a fantasy series, so I definitely saw a bigger picture of what like Garber was trying to do. And I know a lot of people didn't like this book, but I thoroughly enjoyed this book. And like I mentioned, it's a 3 book story. It's a trilogy, so a lot of people have a problem with the third book. And while I do admit the third book is kind of weird with the plot twists, I still enjoyed it. I think at the end it tied up very nicely. It was still very connected. Like the three books were very connected with each other. They had the same characters, the same plot line, the same arch line. I enjoyed this series. On the other hand, Stephanie Garber wrote this book called Caraval, which she wrote before Once Upon a Broken Heart. It was her debut novel, and Caraval is also a trilogy. The first book is Caraval, the second book is called Legend, and the third book's called Finale. And because I enjoyed Once Upon a Broken Heart so much, I decided to like immediately read Caraval, because although they're not really seamlessly connected with each other, they are in the same universe. And Caraval takes place right before the contents of Once Upon a Broken Heart. So I was very excited. And I did not enjoy Caraval, like the trilogy, at all. The first book was still fine, but the second and the third book were so different from the first book. I thought I was reading a completely different story. I did not see a very big connection. Like it just the first book's like main plotline is so different from the second and the third book's plotline. And the issue that I have with Stephanie Garber's writing, with both Caraval trilogy and Once Upon a Broken Heart trilogy, is that she's a very messy writer. And what I mean by that is that it's so hard to visualize what she's writing. And maybe that's like a me problem. Like I'm a visual reader. I like to visually like create images in my brain when I'm reading. So I can know what's going on, and like that personally helps me understand the story better, like no matter what book I'm reading. But I feel like visualizing is so important with fantasy genre series, because it's a completely new world that you're not familiar with, and if you're not able to like visually like create your own type of world in your brain, it's gonna be really hard to understand. But her writing, I don't know, in my opinion, it was just so all over the place. I had such a hard time visualizing what she was saying, and I feel like she doesn't specify a lot of things, but at the same time she says a lot. So a lot of times is it feels like she's saying a lot, but she's not really saying it. So I did not enjoy this book. Right, the next book is called The Forest of Enchantments, and it's written by Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni. I'm Indian and I just butchered an Indian's name. And I loved this book so much. It was one of my favorite books that I read last year. And this is basically a retelling of Ramayana, but in the perspective of Sita, and is told from Sita. And I just thought it was such an interesting take on Ramayana and just the events that happened. And it doesn't just talk about Ramayana, it talks about like Sita's childhood, Sita's upbringing, how she first got married to Ram, how she first went to Ayodhya, the 14 years of banishment, her 1 year in Ravan's palace, and then after she came back, how like she had loved Kush and like she was kind of banished again. And just reading this just made me see Ramayana in a whole new story. And it just made me appreciate, like, it just made me realize how important women have been historically in India, like in history, in like our history. But you realize when you read stories like Ramayana, and when you hear Kekai's story, when you hear Draupadi's story, when you hear Jhansi Ki Rani, you realize like etc. etc. You realize just how important women have been in our history, and how much of a big role they played in shaping our history. And I feel like this book was so well written. I loved the character building in Sita, I loved the character building in Ram, and I loved how the story makes you realize how like love can have different faces. Like, and because I loved this book so much, I decided that the last book I read the last book I read last year was called The Palace of Illusions, which is also written by the same author. And The Palace of Illusions is Draupadi's story. I was really, really looking forward to read The Palace of Illusions and read like Draupadi's perspective, but I was disappointed because I just did not enjoy the character building for Draupadi in The Palace of Illusions. I found her to be very egoistic, very arrogant, and very annoying. And I know this is fiction. I thought pretty much everyone in that story to be not well built. And like the issue I had with the Palace of Illusions was, so like Draupadi is has had such a I don't want to say tragic, but like her life has been so humiliating. And I really wanted to read the part where, you know, Arjun like wins the competition and she chooses Arjun her as her husband. I wanted to read the entire the Draupadi's humiliation scene where like Duryodhan kind of like tries to undress her. Was it Duryodhan or was it his younger brother? Either way, he tries to undress her in the court in front of everyone, but Krishna Bhagwan saves her. But the author basically skipped over that entire like two scenes, and this wasn't the only two scenes. Like she skipped over the major events. Like in detail, she like decided not to write those in details. I mean, I don't blame her. They're very difficult scenes to write, just because you have to be historically accurate. You can't just write rubbish. But at the same time, I think that was the entire point of the book. Like that was what a lot of people genuinely wanted to read. They wanted to see that happen, and they wanted to see Draupadi's perspective on that, because we've only got a man's perspective on how Draupadi felt. We never saw Draupadi's perspective on how she felt. So yeah, I was disappointed. Anyways, that was my review for all the books I read in 2024. And if you guys made it till the end, thank you so much for watching. I've never filmed a video in my life before. I've never edited a video in my life before. I have zero equipment, by the way. I have a phone and a tiny tripod, and I have zero microphones, zero editing skills, zero lighting, zero zero knowledge about making videos. So thank you so much for sticking out and listening to this video until the very end. And who knows, maybe I'll post another video again one day. Bye!